this is a team that never has that year where they say, you know what, we know that realistically we're just not there. We need to take a step back to take a step forward. That's not been something that the Angels have been willing to do.
All right, let's be quick because we're covering the Angels and their top prospect while he is still a prospect. If you know, you know. Let's hit a prospect profile. The name of that prospect is Caden Dana, Scott Braun, J.J. Cooper, Geoff Pontes. And JJ, I mention this because the Angels like to rush their prospects. So talk me through their game plan here.
Okay, their game plan is, we saw Caden Dana reach the big leagues last year. The Angels are not an organization that preaches a whole lot of patience. So I would say that, we're looking at him in spring training, and a healthy Caden Dana is battling for a spot in the rotation. And then I would say, hey, what we've seen in recent years, especially with the pitchers, I would just ask for a little bit of patience. We're talking about a pitcher who is younger than some of the pitchers who will be drafted in the 2025 MLB draft. And I think he could use some additional time, additional seasoning. I don't think that not having Caden Dana in the big leagues on opening day is going to be the difference between this club making a deep playoff run or not. I think I can feel comfortable saying that's probably not going to be the case. With that being the idea, like, we've seen with Patrick Sandoval and Reed Detmers and Griffin Canning, and we could go through this list. There have been a lot of guys who moved quickly for them, starting pitchers, and got a lot of up and down performances out of them. And Geoff, I just don't know if I would say right now, we like Caden Dana as a prospect, it's top 100 prospect. But I do think that we're not talking about a fully finished, a fully polished, this guy has checked off every box you need to see to say he's ready to be a big league starter.
Yeah, and I think we even saw it when he came up to the big leagues last year. He's a guy that gets by on really good pitchability. He throws strikes, he competes in the zone consistently, he gets deeper into starts. There's a lot to be said for that. He certainly handled, double A as well as one could be expected at how old he was. But I think when you dig into some of the numbers, and I'm not the first person to call this, to the forefront with Dana, his release heights on his pitches are all over the place. What that means, it's a little bit easier to pick everything up. He's throwing from a 73-inch release height on the fastball, and then it drops down 4 or 5 inches for the slider. It drops down about 4 or 5 inches for the changeup, and he mixes in a curveball that actually comes from a higher slot than his fastball. All these teams have access to this information. It's going to be out there in pregame scouting reports. After the first, at bat, or even the first couple of pitches, guys are going to start picking up where the ball's coming out of the hand. These are major league hitters. These guys are great at adjusting, great at picking up little, details and little idiosyncrasies of each one of these players that I think Dana probably is best served spending more time at Double A. If they'd actually want to send a prospect to Triple A for the first time in a very long time, perhaps that's where he ends up. I think there's even a case that could be made that maybe Dana shouldn't have been our number one prospect. Maybe really Christian Moore might be the more upside guy when you think about all the tools that he has and some of the stuff that maybe he needs to refine isn't quite the gap to get to major league regular that I think it is with Dana right now. There's 4 different pitch shapes. Like I said, he can compete with all of them. He throws them for strikes. He gets deep into starts. He showed efficiency and the ability to get outs consistently at the Double A level. I still think he needs a little bit more time just to be nurtured a little bit more in terms of, making sure the release heights are just a little bit more consistent, because those gaps of 4 or 5 inches are pretty big gaps when you're talking about a guy who doesn't, that isn't throwing a slider that's, outlier movement or outlier velocity or a combination of the both. It's kind of stock sort of pitch mix. And there's some elements that I feel like lack deception. And I think that's an element that sometimes is hard to measure with the numbers. But when we see it in the release heights, I think it's really quite a big issue. So needs a little bit more time. I think he was rushed a little bit too quickly to the major leagues, but that's kind of been the MO for the Angels over the last 3-4 seasons.
I do want to kind of, in positive, say something positive about Dana here, which is we do like him. This is a guy who has big league starter potential. Most of his peers, most of his contemporaries are hoping to get to Double A in 2025. He's already reached the majors. It's just that, you want to see him get to add this polish. You want to see him. the things Geoff mentioned, these aren't unsolvable problems. They're just things that ideally you want to fix while you're in the minors, not the majors. So I would say with all of this, it's like, please, a little bit of patience here. And kind of could say the same thing. Christian Moore reached AA last year, pretty much, seemingly a couple of hours after he signed, which is not that unusual for the Angels and what they do with their top picks. As Geoff mentioned, this is really kind of a strange situation where the Angels don't really use their high A or their AAA clubs a whole lot for their best prospects, which kind of makes for an uneven development process because you're asking guys a lot of the times. Nelson Rod is another one we saw this with, who jumped straight to AA and was one of the youngest players in that league. Probably should have been in high A, but the Angels don't really send their top prospects to high A. Their top college draftees often go to AA, almost straight from the draft. We see that over and over. And yeah, there are examples where it's worked out. Zach Neto's a guy where it worked out. There's also a lot of guys where it hasn't worked out, where you look back and say, okay, Nolan Shanuel's already burned a year plus of service time trying to figure it out in the big leagues. And he's not like completely lost up there, but he's not making a big impact or anything like that. And by pushing guys that quickly, you kind of are asking them to figure out some of the toughest things to figure out at the toughest level rather than letting them figure that out in the minors in games that don't count the same way that they count in the big leagues.
JJ, philosophical question for you. Why? I mean, do the locker rooms smell in AAA? Why would they do this? And the reason I ask it with such curiosity is it's one thing if this is being done by many other organizations. I don't feel like the Angels have earned the recent right to be going against the grain or setting a tone and saying, you know what, this is the right way to develop prospects. That's what confuses me. I mean, I obviously always have this cynical brain that says, does ownership want to see who he picks as a shiny toy in the big leagues too quickly? But you can maybe bring me back down to earth and tell me what's happening here.
I'd say two things. One, I do follow, like, Salt Lake is not a fun place to pitch. So there is a little bit of an aversion, not just there, but you're playing Salt Lake, you're in Reno, you're in parks that are really tough pitchers parks. So, okay, maybe you want to avoid some of that. And that there's some logic to that. But the other thing is that we've just seen over and over is that it's kind of this never ending cycle, which is the team has lacked upper level minor league depth, which kind of then means that your best options sometimes are these players who really may not be ready, right? So it could be something where you say, okay, this guy could use some more time. But if you're really looking at asking the question and saying, well, who's our best option? In a lot of these cases, these have been the best options. These players who may not be fully ready, but the Angels kind of have never, we saw this with the Shohei Ohtani final year of his contract, right? There's just never, even though this is a team that has not gone to the playoffs in a really long time, and Mike Trout is still sitting on one career postseason hit. This is a team that never has that year where they say, you know what? We know that realistically we're just not there. We need to take a step back to take a step forward. That's not been something that the Angels have been willing to do. And again, I would say under this ownership, under multiple front offices under this ownership. And because of that, you see guys kind of pushed up there faster than maybe they're ready in some cases because, well, we don't really have another good option. This is a team that has not had a whole lot of AAA kind of that depth that you can just plug in when an injury arises. And there have been plenty of injuries also, obviously, for the Angels.
Yeah, it's a very unique organization. And of course, it always looks weird when you match them up with the team that's pretty close by in the Dodgers. But it is what it is right now. And they're going through it still as an organization. Hope you enjoyed this one. Obviously got some good Caden Dana and a little bit of Christian Moore talk in there. And if you get yourself a Baseball America subscription, you can learn a lot more about the Angels organization, specifically their farm system. We do these for every single team, going through top prospect by top prospect. So check out some other videos.